Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome and welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. I have a pretty quick and easy, I hope, project for us to do today. We're going to figure this out as we go along. So this is a trial and error, let's see what happens project. I did not look to see if there was a pattern anywhere. I have not tried to make this before, so we're just going to dive in and figure it out together. Now, if you've been watching my channel for any amount of time at all, you know that I love all things vintage, including really cute vintage purses. The problem that comes in is that sometimes my wallet will not fit in the vintage purse or some of my new purses for that matter. But in all honesty, all I need is just something to slip a couple cards in and maybe a little cash. Now, I know that I could obviously go buy one of these at the store and it'd be perfectly fine and easy and simple, but you know, sometimes you just want something custom and handmade, right? So that's what we're gonna make today. We're gonna make a little card holder and a little place for me to stick just a few dollars in cash or whatever in the center. So let me swing you on down to the table and walk you through what I've done so far and what the idea is, and hopefully we'll see a good finished result. I am in Columbia, Missouri, so you probably know that I am a Tigers fan. And so I have two different Mizzou fabrics sitting here in front of us, and they are 4.5 inches wide. That's what I've cut them because cards are typically 3.5 by 2.25. And so I want them to be a little wider. I want the strips of fabric to be a little wider than that card because I'm going to layer my strips of fabric with some interfacing in between. And then we're going to put a binding just on the edges. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the ironing board first. And I'm going to press these out really good, cut some fabrics, and then I'm going to fold them and stack them. And we're going to make ourselves a little card holder. Hopefully my iron remembered that I wanted to use it. And I am just going to cheat for this first part. I'm just going to use that folded edge of the fabric. Now, if I wanted to conserve more fabric, then I would obviously start from the other edge and then just start folding them and putting them and staggering them together. But we're just going to cheat a little bit here first. I'm also going to use this Omnigrid Marca-Seam, basically, ruler. It's this cute little ruler. It's 5 inches long, maybe it's 6 inches long. Yep, 6 inches long and about a 1/2 inch wide. That's how far I want between the very tippy top and the next place where I'd put a card in. And I'm just going to alternate these fabrics back and forth. Now, the other thing is I want to make sure that I have enough for several cards to go in here. I usually take like, I don't know, 2 or 4 cards with me. So I want to make sure I have enough spaces for 4 cards, 2 on each side. So I have one here, and then I need another fabric here, so that one would make a pocket as well. If I do that on both sides, and I know I have plenty of space for the 4 cards that I want to take with me, plus we're going to leave this middle part stitched so we can just slip some cash down in between the 2 sides of the card holder. Sorry, since the card is 3.5 by 2.25, we're just going to slip it in here and see where that's at. And then we're also going to take our card and say we want it right here. So if we cut this right at the 2.5 inch mark, but remember we're going to put another piece of fabric here as well. So if we cut this right at the 3 inch mark from this black fabric, then it'll be plenty to mark our final little side. And remember, this is just one side of it. So here's the first 2 layers. Then we're just going to simply take one piece of our fabric here. We're going to fold it in half just because I don't want to have to measure too much. So I'm just making this. I'm trying to make this simple on myself. Hopefully it works out. This is one of those things that's like, well, you know, if it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, then whoops. But we will find out together. So now I can flip this over and cut this off because this will be perfect just to slide this card into. And that's going to be one side. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for the other side. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a couple pins in these just to kind of hold them together. Now we can use this as our pattern for the other side. And the other side, I want to go opposite. So I want to start with the black and then go gold and then go black, just to give it a little contrast. Now, since I do know the measurements this time, I'm just going to kind of mark this up, fold it, and I will take measurements of all of these things and I will put them in the description box down below. So do not fear. That is the tallest. All right. So now I'm just going to fold this one back and I'm going to put this here because remember I've used 1/2 inch for a difference in between the heights. Snug that up there. It doesn't have to be perfect. If we cut a little bit off, it's going to be all right. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect 1/2 inch either. And remember, it's 3 inches down from the middle, a little pocket. Move this down and measure, make sure it's at least 1/2 inch. And again, I'm going to put a couple little pins in this. We also need to make sure that we don't forget to cut our interfacing. That's what's going to give us some stability. Otherwise, our little pockets are not going to stand up the way they should. They'll get like, you know, they won't work as well. But then this is what it's going to look like. And we're going to put a little bit of binding around the 3 sides. This top side doesn't need anything because it has that finished folded edge. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of top stitching and a little bit of interfacing, but we're going to do all that over at the sewing machine. Okay, so we know that this is 4.5 inches wide. So our interfacing will also be cut at 4.5 inches wide. And I don't believe, this is a little scrap that I had. It's only 4. So we're going to have to cut it. And we're going to need 6 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so the other thing I'm not going to worry about is I'm not going to worry about trimming them off quite yet because we're going to do a little cheat. Okay, so these are all pinned nicely together, but we're going to unpin them just momentarily. And we're going to take one of our pieces of interfacing and we're just going to slide it in here right into that fold. And then we're going to do a little top stitch. Now you can back stitch if you want. You don't really necessarily have to because we're going to put some binding around both sides. So you don't necessarily have to do that back stitch if you don't want to. And again, I'm just working with some interfacing scraps. So I'm also not too worried about any waste at this point. It was already kind of waste. I do like that I'm using it up though, rather than just throwing it away. And like I said, this little bit of interfacing is just going to give those little card pockets a little stability. These would be so cute for stocking stuffers. A little bitty, you know, be super cute if you wanted to give one of these with some gift cards in there. And you could obviously make more. You can make it as big or as small as you want. I just love it when I look at something and I'm like, you know what, I can make that and sit down, grab a few supplies and go to town. Now, before I trim these off and before I sew any of these layers together, the next thing I'm going to do is use my ruler and just think about my card. All right, so we don't want our cards slipping so far down inside our little card holder that we can't get them out, because if that went all the way down to the bottom here, we would never be able to get that card out again. So we want it to sit up here where we can grab it easily, right? So what we need to do is just run a couple little top stitches across here. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna layer your 2 biggest pieces together because you wanna run this stitch line so when the card is slipped in between here, it won't slip down further. So what I've done is I've just marked a mark from the top of, on this one, the black fabric, 1 7/8 of an inch down from that top. And we're going to put these 2 through the machine together. Now, when we take our card and slide it inside that pocket, it's going to keep it up where we need it so we can grab it out of our purse, out of our little card holder. And then we're going to have to do the same exact thing with the lowest level. Again, you're just going to mark 1 7/8 down from the top, which I've already done, and run this through. And again, when we put our card in here, it's going to stay put so we can grab that out easily from our little card holder. All right, so let's get the other side done, and then we'll talk about putting it together. All right, so now I'm going to trim these up really good before I put my binding on the edges, and we are almost done. Now, I did end up cutting a little bit more off the bottom than I originally thought I would, just because I want my binding to cover this lowest seam line. So what I did is I measured 1/4 inch down from the seam line to the edge and cut those off. So now they will line back up the way they should. This is the first side and the second side, and then that secret little middle pocket for any cash that we may have that we want to stick in there. Now we're just going to run our binding around the 3 edges and be done. Now, since there are a lot of layers here, I am going to go ahead and run a little stay stitch on both of the sides of these just to make sure all my pockets stay up correctly before I put my binding on. And the other thing I'm going to do is with my binding itself. So I've taken a 2.5 inch strip of fabric and I have folded it in half and pressed it. And I'm just going to turn under the one end that I start with. And I'm just going to run a little stay stitch or a little top stitch there to give that a finished edge. And then when I go to put this on, and when I wrap it around, it's going to have a nice finished edge on it. All right, so I'm just going to start. I'm right-handed, so we're going to start on the right-hand side. I'm going to start right over here and go down the side. Now we're going to have to stop over on the other side because we don't know exactly where we're going to end with our binding. Now I'm going to use my Juki and I'm going to set my needle at 1/4 inch. So I'm 1/4 inch from the edge. And then when I get to the corner, I'm going to stop, just like if you're binding a quilt, and we'll flip this up and turn our corner and continue on. It's a lot more layers than a quilt, but we'll get there. Again, we're just going to turn that corner just like you're binding a quilt. Now we're going to stop a little ways from the edge because we need to measure and turn and make that finished edge over here. So I'm just going to turn this over like this. And I'm going to take my pink chalk and just make a line right here so I know where to turn it. And then I'm going to cut out a little ways. I'll open this up. Oh, I think I stopped a little too late. That's all right. We'll just take a few stitches out. That's what happens when you are making a project up as you go, right? Sometimes you have to adjust what you've done. But we'll get there. All right, and now we're going to turn that under for a finished edge and just run a little stitch there. And now we'll go ahead and stitch it into place. I'm sure some of my people that make bags all the time have a better way of doing these little top edges. I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. I think this is going to work for what I need, but I would love to hear from you. All right, now I'm just going to flip this around and we'll stitch it down into place and we'll have a nice little card case. Let me get some of these strings out of here though. You know, I keep referencing how to bind a quilt, and I'm thinking right now that maybe some of you don't do that. Maybe you don't quilt. So you may not know what I mean by that. I do have a really good tutorial on the channel about some binding for quilts. So if you are not familiar with how to do that and you need some additional help on how I'm finishing this edge, please make sure that you go check that out. All right, let's try it out and wrap up. Well, I have to say that this is a success. I can put my cards in here in both sides. So in this little pocket or in this little pocket, they also will go in the other side for the little pockets here. And I have a nice little place right here in the middle to stick a little bit of cash or, you know, whatever else that I might need in the middle there. Fun, fun. So yeah, here is the solution to my problem, because this is so small and tiny and thin that I can definitely put my cards and my ID in here, throw it in any of my vintage purses and be on my way and not have to rummage through my purse trying to figure out where did my card go, or even worse, I'm telling you, there have been some times I'm like, oh my goodness, I think I lost my card, but it's just gotten kind of lost in the shuffle and it was down in a dark purse where I couldn't find it anywhere. So, and what better way to use up some Mizzou fabric than to have a Mizzou themed card case for my vintage purses, and honestly, some of my newer purses too that are just a little too small for my entire big wallet. So hey, this was fun. Let's work together, make a project, find a solution for a problem that you may or may not have, but it was definitely a problem for me. So thank you for watching the journey with me as I solved my own problem. I will put the dimensions for all of these little pockets down in the description box down below. So if you do want to make this for yourself or for some gifts, or maybe as a gift card holder for birthdays and holidays or whatever that you want to have it for, you will have those dimensions so you can make one just like this, just in the same size. And like I said, this one will hold 4 cards plus a little cash or whatever else in the middle. So it definitely has enough space for most of us to take just a few cards and ID with us if we go out with our cute little vintage purses or whatever, right? So until next time, I hope you find joy in all you do. Carve out some time for crafting and creating. And remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.